In 20 of the last 25 Atlantic hurricane seasons, there's been at least a dozen storms, so we've made it to the letter L on the naming list. But in those 20 years, and in fact in the entire history of naming Atlantic storms, going back to 1950, only 3 names beginning with L have been retired. This year might make it 4. Now here's a chart courtesy of tropical meteorologist Brian McNulty of the University of Miami. It plots the number of retired Atlantic storm names as a function of first letter. Now names starting with I have been retired the most, 11 times. You probably can guess some of them. Irma, Ivan, and Ike, for example. The letters C and F have had 9 names retired, including Charlie and Connie and Florence and Floyd. As for L, I suspect you'd have a hard time recalling any of the 3 names that have been retired, mainly because their impact on the U.S. was either low or 0. Luis in 95, Lenny in 99, and Lily in 2002. And now this year's L storm, Lorenzo, which briefly was a Category 5 hurricane last weekend, just might be added to that list, even though it too won't have much impact on land. Now to understand Lorenzo's story, consider the North Atlantic Ocean. Tropical meteorologists sometimes use the 45-degree west longitude line as a delimiter because it more or less divides the North Atlantic Ocean in half. Now, if we look at all the tracks of North Atlantic tropical cyclones going back more than 100 years, yes, it becomes a mess. But for our purposes today, you can see that the vast majority of all the tracks are to the west of that benchmark longitude line. The eastern half of the Atlantic is much less busy, and that's where Hurricane Lorenzo is setting records. For example, Lorenzo attained Category 5 intensity farther north and east of any Category 5 on record in the Atlantic. Now to put that in perspective, here the blue dot shows where Lorenzo became a Cat 5. The red dots show where other Cat 5s first attained that intensity. The nearest to Lorenzo's location was more than 600 miles to the west-southwest. That was Isabel in 2003. Bottom line, historically, we just don't see hurricanes at Cat 5 intensity so far north and east, in large part because the ocean is usually not warm enough and high-altitude winds tend to be too strong. More Lorenzo stats. It was a major hurricane, Category 3 or higher, east of that 45-degree longitude benchmark for 3.5 days, which is twice the record previous length set by a hurricane back in 1957. And finally, Lorenzo has racked up the most accumulated cyclone energy, a measure that blends intensity with longevity of any hurricane in that part of the Atlantic, breaking a record set way back in the year 1900. Lorenzo brushed the Azores earlier today and is now racing northeast, rapidly losing its tropical characteristics. It's already generating huge waves along and ahead of its path in the North Atlantic. Its remnants will likely bring rain and wind to parts of Ireland and Great Britain over the next 2 days. Officially, there's still plenty of hurricane season left. Is there anything else brewing in the tropics? Stay tuned. Our extended forecast is next.